Hey everybody, Plushie here. So today we will talk a little bit about the brand new SSR Saber that was released last week in JP, Medusa. Now, whenever a brand new servant is released right before anniversary, they're going to have a hard time to convince people to roll. So let's find out whether Lasengo put out a convincing bait to get people to roll right before anniversary, or is she something that most people should just skip anyways. Without further ado, let's get into today's hot take video of Medusa Saber. With a completely different reason to my Durga hot take, I would also be briefly showing you Medusa Saber's MP gain and her quick card MP gain in particular. Not because it's so low like Durga, but because it is so high. Now her main competition in my opinion is still going to be Okita, and her quick cards are still a little bit worse than Okita in terms of MP gain. However, we will soon see why that isn't a problem at all in terms of her abilities, especially when compared to Okita. Medusa's first skill is a 100% chance to petrify. Petrify, if you don't know, is a form of stun that is not affected by a stun resistance, nor is it affected by stun chance boost effects, which usually doesn't come into play anyways, so you can just treat it as a 100% stun. It also boosts her quick card critical damage by 50% for 3 turns. Now, it is kind of unfortunate that it is not a general crit boost, but she does have triple quick, and her quick cards are probably her best cards in her deck anyways, so although you can't use this very well with Mighty Chains, it's still a pretty good buff. And finally, it also gives her a 3-turn buff that allows her to cast a 5-turn 500 damage curse on the enemies whenever she attacks with her quick cards. So this does, stack up pretty high if you are using her solo and you're spamming her quick chains, but most of the times I would not use her in a curse team. So this is unfortunately kind of a wasted effect. Overall, this is a 6-turn cooldown skill. It's a control skill. It's really strong. The 100% stun is really powerful when you're soloing with her, and the 50% crit boost on her quick cards is just a generally good buff. I would say that this skill is used in 2 different situations depending how you use her, because spoiler alert, she is a pretty good solo unit. So if you are soloing with her, I do suggest using her Petrify for survival, but if you're not soloing with her, you're using her in a team, I would just use it for the crit boost. Medusa's second skill is a 50 MP battery, and it also is a 20% team-wide attack buff, basically a charisma, and finally it increases the critical damage of demonic allies for 3 turns by 30%, all on a 6-turn cooldown. Finally, another quick servant with a 50 MP battery. I never got this design philosophy where arch servants are usually less, reliant on straight up charges, but they usually get 50 MP batteries, but quick servants always get 30 for some reason. Well, at least here we got a 50 MP battery, which is definitely very strong. It allows her to fire off her MP very, very quickly if you just pair her with Scotty. It also has a charisma effect, even if you just consider it for herself. A 20% attack boost for 3 turns is pretty okay. And finally, it boosts demonic allies crit damage by 30% for 3 turns. Unfortunately, she is not demonic herself, which is quite surprising, but this basically does not affect her. And in my opinion, usually you do not use her as a support anyway, so this is kind of a dead effect like the curse effect on her first skill, which is kind of unfortunate, but overall it's still a really solid skill because of the massive battery and the pretty good general attack boost. Sometimes she can also be used in multi-core, which we will get more into when we look at her MP. So the charisma isn't all bad, but definitely I would have preferred a bigger number that only applies to herself. And finally, Medusa's third skill is a 3x 3-turn invul, as well as a 3x 3-turn debuff immunity, and finally it increases her own critical chance resistance by 30% for 3 turns, basically decreases her chance of getting hit by a crit. So this is a superb survival skill. 3x 3-turn invul is almost the top level of hard defense that you can get. I would say it's still a little bit below protection from arrows, because in certain cases you kind of waste the stacks. It doesn't run out within 3 turns, but on the flip side, this means that this can usually protect a servant really well in 3 turns, and even when you're soloing, this can usually tank a couple of hits, even sometimes across turns, if your enemy only moves twice every single turn. The debuff immunity that lasts for 3x 3 turns is very much appreciated, because usually those are 1x 3 turns, and As I've said before in a lot of other servant hot takes, I'm not a big fan of that, but having this at 3 times 3 turns can allow her to block off a lot of debuffs from the enemy, especially enemies with annoying gimmicks that cast very devastating debuffs. This is a very powerful effect. And finally, on top of all of that, it also decreases her chance of getting hit by a crit by 30% for straight up 3 turns. And this can actually, once again, be very beneficial, especially in solos against certain bosses that are very heavy reliant on their crits. This can definitely shut down their damage, and overall it just prevents her from getting killed by a random crit out of nowhere. So this is a really good survival skill on a 6-turn cooldown as well, paired up with her petrify effect and her MP, which once again, another little spoiler we'll get into later. This is a very powerful skill. You can very easily, drag turns out and get this cooldown back. As for her passives, Medusa has Magic Resistance A, which is a 20% base debuff resistance, which I always appreciate. This allows her to block off a lot of random debuffs thrown her way. Now, it is not really consistent. It is definitely not as good as someone like Durga, who has Goddess Core as well as Magic Resistance A, which totals up to 40%. 20% is still appreciated, and if you pair her up with specific servants that can give you magic resistance boosts, they sometimes add up to 100, and you don't have to worry about it anymore, namely people like Asclepius and Rhaenys. Medusa also has Writing A, which is a passive that gives her a 10% boost on all her quick attacks, and that is very good on her, particularly because she has a triple quick deck. Her best card is quick, and her MP is quick as well, so she is probably the best servant to have this passive ever. And finally, Divinity. This allows her to have some weird synergy with Steno, but this also opens up her vulnerability from taking massive damage from anti-divine enemies. So yeah, generally I wouldn't consider this a good passive. And finally, let's take a look at her MP. I've been a little bit teasing about it when we were talking about her skills and MP gain, but finally let's take a look at it. So her MP is a single target, 9-hit quick MP. Now you pair that 9 hits with that 1.14 base MP gain, she refunds more than single target art servants, and we'll get a little bit into that when we talk about the conclusions. But this MP also deals 150% extra damage to enemies with man attributes. So this is an anti-trait MP, and if you're using her against anti-man, she's gonna be doing massive amounts of damage. This MP also has a 40% chance to petrify enemies for a single turn. Now 40% is pretty low, but considering how easily Medusa can spam her MP with her insanely stupid MP refund on her MP and MP gain on her quick cards, this is kind of the only way to balance it, basically. This, if it procs like once every 3 turns, this is already extremely good. We also have to consider that Medusa's first skill is a 100% petrify, so when you combine these 2 effects, she can very much drag on the fight and get her cooldowns back, mainly her 3rd skill cooldown to get her defensive back up. So overall, this is a very scary effect. I get why they made it only 40%, especially on a servant like Medusa, and usually I don't like considering these types of stuns. Like whenever I bring up people like Bradamante, I consider these like horrible effects, but on Medusa particularly, it's really good. And finally, she increases the attack of allies, including herself, with earth attributes by 20% for 3 turns. Now, unfortunately, this effect triggers after she does the damage with her MP, but it is still a ramping effect, meaning that her MPs is going to be doing more and more damage the more you loop it, which she will have 0 trouble doing at all. And finally, her overcharge effect is a quick buff for 1 turn before the damage actually happens that scales from 10% to 30%. Now this is probably the weakest part of her MP because the number is low. I would have liked it if it was 20%, especially considering the ramping effect happens after the damage. She really needs that initial damage boost whenever she uses her MP, and 10% just doesn't cut it most of the time, but it's still a good bonus that slightly increases her MP gain and her star gens and stuff when you use her MP. So it's still appreciated, but it's a little bit of a letdown. So how do I feel about Medusa Saber? Now, at first glance, a single target quick servant is usually going to be less desirable for most players, considering most players do hyper focus on a servant's ability to farm and usually single target quick servants are not the best at farming. However, Saber Medusa has a lot going for her that actually allows her to fit in quite well in multi-core farming compositions. First of all, she has 50 MP battery. That is a large number that will definitely increase her flexibility in terms of team comps compared to her other two peers, Saber Astolfo and Okita. She also has the best refund out of all the three by quite a large margin with her MP alone, so you don't really have to rely on face cards when you're farming with her, especially if you're willing to dump multiple quick buffs on her. Medusa Saber also has two forms of AoE buffs. The first form is a 20% AoE attack up, which is already pretty solid, and she also has a 20% attack up additionally to all Earth allies. That doesn't just apply to her, and there are quite a bit of good Earth farming servants that fit well in multi-core farming, such as Dolman, Morgan, Oberon, and a lot more options that I can't really think of right now immediately. So overall, you know, it is a little bit dependent on the node, because usually you are not able to fire off, you know, a single target quick MP multiple times in a 90++ farming node. It's basically a luxury. It's really hard to get that to happen, even with how high Medusa Saber's refund is, but when it works out, it is a whopping 60% combined attack up to another Earth ally, which is obviously really high. Even if you just use her MP once before another Earth ally uses their MP, it is a combined of 40% attack up, which is a pretty sizable buff. But overall, Medusa is pretty okay. You know, Quick still has quick problems like Scotty having a singular targeted battery instead of an AoE battery, and you know, Quick still not having the best refund boost ever, despite how good Medusa's hit counts is. She is not able to compete with the top dogs in the arts category like Vlad or Draco, and her damage is also lacking unless she is hitting anti-man compared to other staple options with 50 MP charges like Kintoki. Medusa Saber's performance in high difficulty quests is a lot more impressive than her ability to farm, in my personal opinion. With the combination of her skill 1's basically guaranteed petrify, as well as her very spammable 40% petrify on her MP, she is able to buy a lot of turns by just using her MP and her skill 1 alternatively. Especially if you're fighting against a singular boss that is susceptible to petrify, she can buy the entire team a lot of extra turns to regain their cooldown, regain their MP, do whatever they want. Her third skill is also a superb survival skill that not just guarantees her survival for multiple turns, but also has the 3x3 turn debuff immunity that can very much deal with a lot of recent CQs that like to throw nasty debuffs on you, and she also has the additional protection of the 30% crit resist. So overall, she's a very hard character to kill. Medusa also has perhaps the easiest time refunding her MP, even outdoing many single target art servants because of her hit counts. And especially now that we're talking about challenge quests, we can take her face cards into consideration. She very often full refunds off of just 1 MP as well as a singular quick or arts crit. That is how good her refund is. She also generates so many stars whenever she does her MP because it's a 9-hit quick MP with inherently good star gen on her quick. So overall, she's just going to be creating a bunch of stars, you know, over 60 stars very often, getting her MP back and just using her MP back to back, even after Scotty's buff run out. If you like spread them out, if you plug in a third Scotty after your first 2 Scotties run out, she can keep going. She just never runs out of gas. And you know, she also has this 40% petrify on her MP, even though once again 40% is pretty low. Imagine if it procs like every 3 MPs. That essentially means that every 3 turns she's going to be proccing that petrify just because of how easily she loops her MP. Combine that with her first skill, once again she's kind of a stun lock character. With all of those good being said, I have 2 little gripes I have with Medusa Saber. The first gripe I have with her is her triple quick deck, which isn't that bad a thing considering how broken her quick cards are, but because Summer Scotty, aka the prime quick support right now, has a really hard focus on boosting your buster crits, therefore I do like, you know, BBQQA decks on quick boss killers a lot more than triple quick. Because of that, I do actually recommend bringing double caster Scotty instead of double Summer Scotty in a lot of the cases when you're using Saber Medusa, simply because she has 3 quick cards, so it's a lot easier to take advantage of the quick crit on caster Scotty's skill 1 than the buster crit on ruler Scotty's skill 1. So yeah, that's kind of a small problem. It's not really Medusa's fault. The second gripe has even less to do with Medusa, but more to do with Quick as a whole. So despite how good she is with, triple Scotty or double Scotty plug some other support, if you really want to fight a boss with the safest play in mind, you would still go for arts, simply because of how broken Castoria is, and other supporting art supports such as Lady Avalon and Tamamo. They're just all really hyper focused on stall and keeping your team alive, compared to someone like Scotty, who has a lot of trouble getting her MP, and her MP isn't even as good as protecting your team compared to someone like Castoria. So it's really Castoria's fault, but we can't really do anything about it. We have to play around it. And finally, of course, Medusa Saber is extremely good at soloing. And if you follow my channel pretty closely, you probably have already noticed I've been bombarding it with Medusa Saber solo clips, and my Medusa Saber is only MP1. So I feel like a lot of people already see how strong she is, but obviously the reasons that make her strong are all something that I have mentioned before, in terms of what makes her good in challenge quests: a combination of an extremely spammable 40% Petrify and a basically guaranteed 6-turn cooldown Petrify on her skill 1, her extremely good face cards and MP, and her really defensive skill 3, all combines to make her one of the most powerful solo servants in the game. Medusa Saber is a very interesting case where most of the cases you do want to use Mighty Chains during solos, but in my opinion, I actually prefer using Quick Brave Chains on Medusa Saber because 1, her skill 1 only boosts the critical damage of Quick cards, and 2, she can easily generate over 50 stars by using her Quick Brave Chain, not including her MP by the way, so you can guarantee getting a critical hit on every single one of your cards every single turn, as long as you keep using the Quick Brave Chain. And finally, if you're using MPQQ, I do believe you refund about 50 or even more, depending on what class you're hitting, of course, from just attacking. And depending on what class you're hitting or how many hit counts the enemy has, you can easily loop her MP perpetually against certain bosses. So this is really, really, really good. And I do think her solo ability actually rivals Tyra if you are willing to save scum. If you don't know what that is, that's basically force quitting out of the game and trying to change the RNG of a result. If you're willing to save scum the Petrify on her MP during critical turns, she actually has really high ceiling, but I do understand that a lot of people don't want to do this. They feel like this is a little bit illegitimate, but even if you consider her Petrify to land like once every 3 times, this is still a extremely powerful effect that can just win you the match during solos if it happens. In conclusion, I think Medusa Saber is the peak of quick single target performance. At least in the aspect of MP gain and star generation, she has absolutely ridiculous numbers that allow her to outloop single target art servants, which is extremely difficult for a single target quick servant to do. Medusa Saber also has an extremely solid and more defensive skill set paired with her insane numbers, making her a really good boss killer and soloer. Medusa Saber even has some capacity of team support that makes her kind of valuable in certain 90++ compositions, albeit it is pretty node specific and I would not roll for her just for that role. With her absolutely unfortunate banner timing being right before Anniversary and Summer and during the rerun of the free Welfare Saber Hokusai, I get it is really difficult to try to sell people this character. However, if you do enjoy Medusa as a character, or if you enjoy the quick single target playstyle of infinitely looping your MP and critting every single turn, or you like a really solid solo Saber, Saber Medusa is going to serve you extremely well. I've done all my testing with my own MP1 Saber Medusa, and so far she has been super impressive in every single thing I use her in. Obviously, her biggest problem that I felt is once again her damage, but if you are willing to invest grails or higher MP levels into her, this will slowly no longer be an issue. And of course, we can always go for a broken quick support that will suddenly skyrocket her value through the roof. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed, and best of luck for rolling for Saber Medusa, and I'll see you guys in the next one.